"Leave if you can't pay," a staff member shouted, pointing at the door. A skinny old man in a faded jacket, his hands shaking, reached for his wallet. "Just a few coins, not enough for a meal." The surrounding customers looked on with disdain. No one knew the man had just called his son, who was on a helicopter returning from a military base in just an hour later. The restaurant door was locked as a senior officer stepped out of the command car and asked loudly, "Who disrespected my father? How do you feel about the actions of the staff? Click respect if you feel hurt." Raymond Ellis, 83, stood just inside the entrance, his thin frame draped in a faded military jacket that had seen better days. Despite his age, he held himself upright, a testament to years spent in uniform. His weathered face bore the marks of experience, yet his eyes were keen and watchful. With a simple canvas bag in one hand, he surveyed the room for an empty table, eventually spotting one in the corner. He made his way there slowly, his joints stiff from the morning bus ride. He had planned this meeting carefully. His son Lucas was returning briefly from an overseas assignment, and this diner was a convenient meeting point between the military base and the airport. Raymond settled into his chair, placing his canvas bag beside him. He hadn't seen Lucas in nearly 6 months, not since the promotion ceremony. Their phone calls were brief and infrequent due to the classified nature of Lucas's work, making this short meeting all the more precious. A young server named Derek approached, order pad in hand. Barely 20, he had an air of impatience that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. "What will it be?" he asked without looking up. Raymond smiled politely, "Just a small coffee for now, please. I'm waiting for my son to arrive. He should arrive within the hour." Derek's gaze lifted, taking in Raymond's tired look, and his expression changed from indifference to disdain. "The minimum order is $10. he exclaimed. "We're not just a waiting room." A few diners looked our way before swiftly turning back to their meals. "I understand," Raymond replied calmly. "Perhaps a coffee and a small sandwich, then." He reached for his wallet, fingers slightly trembling as he opened it. Inside were a few crumpled dollar bills and some coins, the remainder of his monthly pension after paying his modest bills. Lucas had insisted on handling the check when he arrived, but Raymond hadn't wanted to show up without any money at all. "I seem to be a bit short at the moment," Raymond said quietly. "My son will be here soon to cover our meal," and Derek's expression turned serious. "Absolutely." He scoffed at that, he had heard it all before, yet Raymond maintained his dignity. "I can assure you he's on his way, if I could just wait." "Get out if you can't pay," Derek suddenly shouted, drawing attention from everyone in the diner. "We don't serve freeloaders here." Conversations came to a standstill as a family with young children stared openly. A middle-aged woman half rose from her seat, then hesitated and sat back down. No one intervened. "Please," Raymond said, his voice still measured despite the humiliation burning in his chest. "I just need to wait for my son." "Yeah, that was the right choice," sneered as I grabbed Raymond's canvas bag. "Perhaps this will take care of your bill." He tipped the bag onto the table, and a small wooden box spilled out, accompanied by several photographs and a weathered leather-bound notebook. The box opened, disclosing military medals tucked inside. "Stop that," Raymond said, his voice finally betraying some emotion. "Those are personal belongings." "You should have considered that before attempting to scam a free meal," Derek replied, carelessly shoving the items back into the bag, now empty. A young waitress named Natalie stepped forward, addressing Derek, as paying customers waited. "Perhaps we should focus on your own tables," Derek snapped. The manager would echo the same sentiment. He yanked Raymond's arm, pulling him up abruptly. The elderly man stumbled, losing his balance, and as he fell, his wallet slipped from his hand, landing open on the floor. A photograph slipped out, showing a military officer in full dress uniform standing beside Raymond at a ceremony. No one stepped forward to assist. No one noticed the 3 stars on the uniform in the photograph. Raymond slowly pulled himself up, gathering his belongings with quiet dignity. His hands were steady now, the training of decades taking over in this moment of crisis. He carefully retrieved the photograph, looking at it briefly before tucking it away. He walked toward the door without another word, back straight despite everything that had just happened behind him. Conversations gradually resumed, the incident already fading from the diner's concerns. Just another elderly man who couldn't afford a meal. Just another disruption to their day. No one realized they had just witnessed the humiliation of a man who had shaped America's most elite warriors for over 2 decades. I apologize for getting emotional here, but how can someone who dedicated his life to protecting our freedom be treated with such disrespect? Raymond Ellis wasn't always the elderly man with weathered hands and silver hair. From 1963 to 1987, he served as a senior training officer for United States Special Forces, molding raw recruits into America's most elite warriors. His military career began in Korea, where he served with distinction as a young lieutenant. But it was at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where Raymond found his true calling, not as a battlefield commander, but as the man who prepared others for those battlefields. His extraordinary ability to identify potential in recruits and his innovative training methods caught the attention of senior leadership. Over the next 2 decades, Raymond developed training programs at bases in Okinawa, Germany, and various NATO installations. His methods became legendary within military circles. He didn't merely teach tactical skills, he instilled a moral framework that guided decision-making in the most extreme circumstances. Anyone can teach a man to fire a weapon, he often told new instructors. Our role is to instruct them on when to hold back. What set Raymond apart was not solely his technical skills. That was significant. It was his grasp of the human spirit, how to break someone down only to rebuild them stronger. How to push people beyond their perceived limits while preserving their dignity. How to cultivate leaders who would make ethical decisions under unimaginable pressure. Generals would send their most promising officers to train under Raymond. Allied nations sought his expertise for their own special forces programs. Yet Raymond never pursued recognition beyond the training grounds. His fulfillment came from witnessing young soldiers evolve into warriors who understood that true strength stemmed from character as much as capability. They referred to him as the teacher of fearless warriors, but Raymond always corrected them. "I don't teach fearlessness," he would say. "I teach them to act with courage despite their fear." His only son, Lucas, grew up watching his father shape America's finest. Their home was modest, but disciplined. Raymond never pushed military service on his son, but Lucas absorbed the values he witnessed: daily honor, integrity, and selfless service. When Lucas announced his intention to join the military, Raymond neither encouraged nor discouraged him. "Serve for the right reasons" was his only advice, or don't serve at all. Lucas did serve, rising through the ranks with a combination of natural leadership and the ethical foundation his father had instilled. He led counterterrorism operations, hostage rescues, and specialized in complex missions requiring both tactical excellence and moral clarity. In early 2023, after decades of distinguished service, Lucas Ellis was appointed commander of USC Special Forces Operations, becoming the youngest officer ever to hold the position. The announcement made national news, with military analysts praising the selection. Raymond watched the coverage from his small home in a quiet, Georgia town, a modest smile his only reaction. When neighbors congratulated him, he would simply say, "Lucas found his own path." Each morning Raymond would rise before dawn, carefully raise the American flag outside his home, and stand at attention as the fabric caught the first light of day. On days when his arthritis wasn't too severe, he volunteered at the local veteran center, listening to younger veterans without ever mentioning his own service or his neighbor. Mrs. Callahan once remarked that you would never know from talking to Raymond that he trained some of our nation's greatest heroes. He listens more than he speaks, and when he does speak, it's never about himself. Raymond lived simply. His home contained few luxuries, but the walls held dozens of photographs, not of himself receiving commendations, but of the men he had trained, captured in moments of achievement or during their own promotion ceremonies. When his driver's license wasn't renewed due to age-related vision issues, Raymond adapted without complaint. He learned local bus routes and occasionally accepted rides from neighbors. He disliked burdening others. Therefore, when arranging to meet his son, who was coming back briefly from an overseas operation. Raymond was determined to find his own way to their meeting point. Lucas had offered to provide a military vehicle, but Raymond respectfully declined. During their brief phone conversation, he assured his son, "I'm perfectly capable of taking the bus. I'll meet you at Harris Diner at 1300 hours." What Raymond didn't mention was that the route required changing buses twice or that his arthritis had been particularly painful that morning. Such details weren't important in his view. What mattered was seeing his son, even if just for an hour. Raymond entered the diner with quiet dignity, intending only to secure a table and perhaps order something small while waiting. His wallet contained just $7.35, not enough for even the cheapest meal on the menu. Lucas would handle the check when he arrived, as they had arranged. He had never imagined that his appearance, the faded jacket, the worn canvas bag, the humble demeanor, would lead to such humiliation. Raymond had trained men to endure physical hardships and psychological warfare, but being treated as worthless in his own country struck deeper than any wound he had received in combat. He never wanted recognition, Lucas would later tell reporters. He never anticipated the disrespect. Raymond walked slowly from the diner, the burden of public humiliation weighing heavily on his shoulders. He spotted a public phone booth at the edge of the parking lot, inserted one of his precious quarters, and dialed a number few civilians would ever have access to. Operations answered with a crisp voice. "My name is Raymond Ellis." He spoke softly. "I need to speak with Commander Ellis." Authentication code Sierra, November 572. There was a brief pause. "Stand by for secure connection." Moments later, Lucas's voice came through. "Dad. What seems to be the issue?" "I'm 10 minutes away." Raymond hesitated, not used to asking for help. "There's been a situation at the diner. He finally said they've asked me to leave." "Asked you to leave?" Lucas's voice sharpened. "Explain." "It's nothing, son. I appear to be low on funds, and then I'll take care of it." Lucas interrupted, his tone changing to what his subordinates referred to as his command voice. "Where are you now?" "The phone booth is located on the east side of the parking lot." "Stay there for 8 minutes." 7 minutes later, the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors shattered the midday quiet. Diners and staff hurried to the windows as a military helicopter landed in the vacant section of the parking lot. Before the blades had completely ceased, Lucas Ellis emerged, followed by 3 uniformed officers. Lucas was not in uniform today. Just a tailored dark suit that did little to hide his military bearing. At 44, he moved with the controlled precision that came from decades of special operations. His eyes located his father immediately. Raymond stood straighter as his son approached, they embraced briefly, a simple clasp of shoulders that conveyed more than words. "Are you all right?" Lucas inquired softly. "I'm doing well." Raymond assured him it was just a misunderstanding. Lucas studied his father's face, noting the faint flush of embarrassment. "Wait here," he said, his voice gentle with his father but hardening as he turned toward the diner behind him. 2 military police officers and a legal affairs officer followed in formation as they entered the diner, and conversations died down. Derek was taking an order when he noticed the sudden silence. He turned to see Lucas standing inside the doorway, flanked by uniformed officers. The legal affairs officer stepped forward. "We're looking for the management of this establishment." A middle-aged man emerged from the back. "I am Martin Harris, the owner. Can you explain what this is about?" "Sir, we are here concerning an incident involving Raymond Ellis, a protected veteran under Federal Code 38 USC. Derek's face turned pale as the realization struck him about the old man. He was unable to settle his bill. "I was simply adhering to the policy." That elderly man, Lucas, interrupted, his voice dangerously controlled. His senior training officer, Raymond Ellis, had retired. He has trained over 3,000 Special Forces operators, including myself and 2 of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The diner fell completely silent, even the cooks had emerged from the kitchen. Lucas continued, addressing the entire room. That elderly man received the Silver Star for gallantry in action. He shaped the warriors who have protected American interests for 4 decades. He turned back to Derek and said, "That elderly man is my father." The legal affairs officer stepped forward under federal statute protecting veterans from discrimination. "We are issuing an immediate closure order for this establishment pending investigation." He handed documents to Martin, who accepted them with trembling hands. "This cannot possibly be lawful." He protested. "It is," the officer replied. "The order has been countersigned by the governor as this property sits on a state highway. You have 30 minutes to clear the premises." Derek stood frozen. "I had no idea he had a stutter. How was I meant to know who he was?" Lucas moved in closer to him. "You weren't meant to recognize him. He mentioned that every individual deserves basic dignity, regardless of rank, title, or status. None of that should hold any significance." He scanned the room, locking eyes with the customers who had remained silent during his father's disgrace. "Each of you had the chance to step in, yet you all opted to turn a blind eye." One of the military police officers started affixing official seals to the doors. The other began taking photographs of the premises as evidence. Lucas turned to leave but then paused. "My father taught me that leadership means defending those who cannot defend themselves. Today, none of you led." Outside, Raymond waited by the helicopter when Lucas emerged. He gave a slight shake of his head. "Son. This truly wasn't necessary." Lucas knelt before his father, removing his own service cap and offering it in a gesture of deep respect. "You taught thousands of us how to stand up for what's right," he said quietly. "Today was my turn to demonstrate that I learned your lesson." As they prepared to board the helicopter, a small crowd had gathered to watch. Someone began to applaud, and others joined in. Raymond looked uncomfortable with the attention, but Lucas stood proudly beside his father, one hand on the older man's shoulder. Together, they boarded the helicopter, leaving behind a sealed restaurant in a community facing uncomfortable truths about how they treated their veterans. No warning. No excuse, just truth, then silence and respect. Comment justice, honor, or chills if you believe justice still exists. The incident at Harris Diner spread across social media with stunning speed. Someone had recorded the confrontation on their phone, capturing Lucas's powerful words and the shocked faces of the customers and staff. Within hours the video had been viewed millions of times. National news networks picked up the story. CNN ran a special segment titled "The Teacher Behind America's Heroes." Fox News interviewed former Special Forces operators who had trained under Raymond Ellis, each sharing stories of his influence on their lives. ABC produced a piece exploring the treatment of aging veterans in America. Hashtags proliferated. Shown us Raymond Ellis Shash and Commander's father Shash veteran dignity top trending lists nationwide. The story transcended political divisions, touching something fundamental about respect and forgotten sacrifice. A petition circulated online to induct Raymond Ellis into the National Veterans Hall of Honor, gathering over 3 million signatures in less than a week. The White House press secretary announced that the president was considering a special commendation. What started as one man's humiliation transformed into a national conversation about how America treats its veterans, particularly those from earlier conflicts whose service had faded from public memory. In schools across the country, teachers incorporated the story into their lessons. One fifth-grade class in Ohio wrote handwritten letters to Raymond collected in a leather-bound book. "Thank you for teaching your son to become a hero," wrote 10-year-old Chloe. "When I grow up I want to stand up for people like you did." A group of young entrepreneurs in Atlanta started a fundraising campaign to create Ellis and honor a coffee shop that would serve veterans free of charge. They raised over $200,000 in the first week. More significantly, individuals who had been present at the diner that day started to come forward with their public apologies for their silence. This became a powerful part of the narrative. Elaine Wilkins, a 70-year-old grandmother who had been seated near Raymond, appeared on a morning talk show. "I observed the situation unfold and remained inactive," she confessed with tears glistening in her eyes. "I've regretted it every minute since. Today, I want to stand with him and all veterans." Victor Cooper, a business executive who had been on his phone during the incident, wrote an op-ed for his local paper. I was too absorbed in my quarterly sales report to notice a man who had dedicated his life to service being humiliated. I'm part of the problem, but I'm committed to being part of the solution. Even Derek, the server who had ejected Raymond, made a public statement from the office of his newly hired attorney. I made a terrible mistake. He said, his voice trembling, that he had judged someone based on their appearance and had treated them as if they were less than human. I am ready to accept the outcomes of my choices. Raymond, on the other hand, stayed mostly away from public attention, turning down most interview requests until a determined reporter finally reached him at his residence. His response was typically modest, "I don't hold anyone accountable." He stated, standing on his porch with impeccable posture, "We all make mistakes. What truly matters is our ability to learn from experiences." When asked about the restaurant's closure and the investigation, Raymond shook his head. Punishing individuals doesn't lead to growth, instead, guiding them toward a better path does. Lucas mirrored his father's example of restraint by making only one official statement. This incident highlights a larger issue regarding our perception of military service. The uniform may come off, but the impact of that service continues to shape the individual. My father instilled in me that honor extends beyond mere ceremonies. It's for everyday interactions. Rather than focusing on the negative, Lucas directed his influence towards positive action. He utilized his first month's salary as commander to create the Raymond Ellis Scholarship Fund for children of veterans, particularly those who had made the ultimate sacrifice. This fund aims to assist dozens of students each year, with a focus on those pursuing careers in public service or humanitarian fields. My father believes that how we treat others defines us, Lucas shared at the launch event. This scholarship will help nurture a new generation that understands that principle. Perhaps the most touching response came from Natalie, the young waitress who had attempted to intervene during Raymond's humiliation. She visited his home personally, bringing her enlistment papers. "Watching your son defend you made me realize what real leadership looks like," she told Raymond. "I've signed up for officer candidate school. I want to serve with that same integrity." Raymond smiled and offered his highest compliment, "You already showed moral courage when it was difficult. That's where all good leadership begins." Saranya. Raymond Ellis returned to his simple daily routines, seemingly unchanged by the national attention his story had received. Each morning, he continued to rise before dawn to raise the flag outside his modest home. He tended to his small vegetable garden and greeted neighbors with the same quiet dignity he had always displayed. He declined all offers of financial support, awards, or special recognition. "I have everything I need," he would tell well-wishers. "Please direct your generosity to younger veterans who are still finding their way." The only addition to his living room wall was a framed handwritten letter from his son, dated years earlier, which Raymond had previously kept in his bedside drawer. Now proudly displayed, it read simply, "Whenever I face difficult decisions in the field, I pondered, what actions of my dad have always guided me right." The local high school held a ceremony to rename their auditorium Raymond Ellis Hall, which Raymond attended with some reluctance. When given the opportunity to speak, he simply advised, "Teach your children that character doesn't shout, it whispers in the moments when no one is watching." Each subsequent year, the hall hosted Quiet Gratitude Day, a ceremony dedicated to honoring those whose service went unnoticed, military veterans, teachers, first responders, caregivers, and others whose contributions quietly shaped communities. Derek, the server who had humiliated Raymond, faced no criminal charges after Raymond intervened personally. Instead, he was assigned community service at the Veterans Center where Raymond volunteered. Initially filled with resentment, Derek gradually formed connections with the veterans, listening to their stories and gaining valuable perspective. 6 months after the incident, Derek approached Raymond during a volunteer shift. "What made you assist me in steering clear of charges?" He asked if I would have understood if you wanted me punished. Raymond continued sorting donation items as he responded, "Punishment changes behavior temporarily. Understanding changes it permanently. Which would you prefer?" As for Harris Diner, the building never reopened, it was eventually acquired by a veterans group and converted into a community center that provides job training and support for former service members. A simple plaque by the entrance read, "Where bridges of understanding are built daily." The final scene that captured America's imagination unfolded on a crisp autumn morning nearly a year after the incident. A news crew filming a follow-up story captured Raymond sitting on his front porch, watching his neighborhood come to life. Neighbors walking by paused to offer a respectful nod or greeting, while children on their way to school waved enthusiastically. One young boy, new to the neighborhood, tugged at his mother's sleeve, saying, "Mom, why does everyone greet that old man?" He asked loudly enough for the microphones to capture his mother kneeling beside him, responding in a clear voice. "Because he's the kind of person who never asked to be remembered, but whom the whole town decided never to forget." If you believe some heroes never needed the spotlight, just fairness, then this story was for you. Subscribe to Tale Strength for more touching stories and veteran stories that matter. Comment, respect, if Raymond's quiet dignity moved you.